All right, I will say good morning. Let us beginning by thanking all of our sponsors, to thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Kislev, to thank Josh and Becca Friedman for dedicating all of the shiurim this month, Le'ili Nishmas Josh's father, Yisrael Yehuda Ben refuah. To thank the Malka Esterson for dedicating the shiurim this month in memory of their parents, Yitzchak Leib ben Aharon, Sarah Rachel bas Baruch Avraham, Hinda bas Henoch Efraim, and in the zechus of the continued health of Mr. Morton Esterson, Almeh ve'esim shalim tovos. To thank the Pepper family for dedicating the shiurim this month, the commemoration of the yahrzeit of Yosef Pepper, Yosef Dovid Ben Yaakov. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Ayal Sara Steinberg for dedicating the learning in the zechus of refuah for Shalamis bas Susha. And to thank Hilary, Jacobson, Kent, and Akiva Kent for dedicating the shiurim this week, in memory of Hilary's father, Tzvi Ben Henoch, and to thank our day of learning sponsors, Doug and Gail Stanger, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Doug's father, Shraga Feivel Ben Moshe Avraham. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, the families in nechama, and those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Chol Yisrael. Also with that, let us begin. So the truth is, it's a short daf, but a lot going on. Actually, not even so much going on topically, just a lot of depth in Meretz Hashem in today's daf. So I'll say, let's begin. Today's daf is Mem Daled 44. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Mem Gimel Amud Beis 43b. So also we left off actually 2, 4, 6 lines up from the bottom. Massive Rabbah. So we'll say, just to orient ourselves a little bit, we had an interesting machlokes in the Mishnah. Our machlokes in the Mishnah was dealing in the following case. Reuven takes a neder to not give any benefit, to not provide any benefit to Shimon. So Rabbi says, so what's the halacha? Now, the last case in the Mishnah was Reuven and Shimon are traveling together. Shimon has no food. Reuven wants to give him food. Obviously, Reuven cannot give him food directly, as that would be a violation of the neder. So what could Reuven do? So 2 cases. If they're traveling along with Levi, a third party, so Reuven could gift it to Levi, and Levi could then go ahead and give it to Shimon. What if there's no Shimon in the picture? So the Rabbanan said, not a problem. Reuven, put the food down, make it hefker, and then Shimon could go ahead and come and take it. Rabbi Yossi comes along and says, no, that doesn't work. That does not work. It doesn't work. Fine. Shabbos says, so now we're trying to figure out, Rabbi Yossi, what's your problem? In other words, why doesn't that work in your model? So Rabbi Yossi, we had so far 2 approaches. The first approach was Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan explained that hefker works like matana. And just like matana does not become the property of the intended recipient until when? Until it actually comes into his possession. So too, interestingly enough, hefker also doesn't come into the possession of the intended recipient until he goes ahead and takes it. But what that means for our purposes is, if it doesn't come into the I do something. Oh, I didn't start it. I realized. Okay. So with hefker, so too if it doesn't come into the property, ultimately again, if it doesn't come into the possession of the, it doesn't for hefker also, it does not leave the possession of the owner up until it comes into the possession of the intended recipient. So we'll say, so the reason why according to Rabbi Yossi that poses a problem is why? That means that when it goes into Shimon's possession, it's directly leaving Reuven, which of course again is going to be problematic als the neder. Okay, Shabbos say, I'm not going to go through all Gemara, but then we challenged that a little bit, right? And the Gemara wanted to make us, then the Gemara ended up saying that Allah Chalamaisa, essentially Rabbi Yossi's idea. Now, okay, so one more piece, and then we'll have to start today's Gemara. Then the Gemara essentially says like this. The Gemara explains that halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Yossi makes an interesting distinction. What was his distinction? His distinction was in a case where the timing of, does he make it hefker first and then make the neder, or make the neder first and then create the hefker? And the Gemara wanted to suggest that Allah Chalamaisa, that makes a fundamental distinction in the realm of Rabbi Yossi, that whereas the hefker occurred first and then the neder, the hefker wouldn't be included in the neder, versus when the neder occurred first and then he made hefker, the hefker would be included in the neder. The logic behind that, says the Gemara, is that halacha l'maisa Rabbi Yossi holds anytime you make a neder, ultimately, again, the neder doesn't include that which you previously made hefker. Good. That's the chazara from yesterday's sugya. Now says the Gemara will say, Mem Gimel on base 43b, 6 lines up from the bottom. Massive Rava. So Rava raised the question. Miktsasan l'rishon v'kulon l'sheni. So Rava says, so now here we go. An interesting case. This is a case of a shchiv meira. Someone who was on his deathbed. So Rava says, so let's read this and then we're going to delve a little bit more into actually what it means. So in this case, the shchiv meira, the person on his deathbed, conveyed property to 2 different people. First, we'll call the shchiv meira gave to Ruvain, and then he gave to Shimon. Now the lashon over here is like this: Miktsasan l'rishon, he gave some of his property to Ruvain, and then kulon l'sheni, then gave all of his property ultimately again to Shimon. So Rabbi will say, so what's the halacha? Rishon kana, Ruvain acquired, Sheni lo kana. Shimon does not acquire. Now I will say, the truth is, I'm just going to point this out to you. There is like a raging machlokias over here as to how to interpret this case. Literally just on the page, Rashi has an approach, the Ran has an approach, and the Rush has an approach. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to go with the Rush. So we'll say, so the Rush is in the left-hand margin. So we're going to skip around in the Rush a little bit as well. Take a look at the Rush left-hand column, about 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines in. Miktsasan l'rishon. Miktsasan l'rishon. The kulon l'sheni, rishon kana sheni lo kana. So look at the Rush writes. He says, shchiv meira, hamechalik nechasav, b'nosim miktsasan l'rishon mekinim. So here's the case. Shchiv meira, just going to call him shchiv meira, guy's on his deathbed. He's giving away property. So he gave away part of his property ultimately to Ruvain, v'achar kach amar v'kulon l'sheni. And then he said, all of the property goes to Shimon. So Rishon Kana, Vim Amad Eno Choser. So we'll say what this means is now, look, just a little bit more background. So we'll say, the daf is very short, but the cases are a little bit involved. So listen to this. In general, when the Shchiv Meira gives a gift, I will say, see, the interesting part is, let's say we'll call him Shchiv Meira. Shchiv Meira gives a gift. So he gives property to Ruvain. And now what happens? Baruch Hashem, he has a refuah shelema. So the truth is, everyone is saying Baruch Hashem had a refuah shelema except for who? Ruvain. Right, Ruvain. They'll say, why? Because what's the question? The question is, when a guy on his deathbed gives a gift, is the gift predicated on his imminent death, or is the gift kind of unconditional? So here's what's interesting about the gift of a shchiv meira. The Gemara says, it depends. What does it depend on? If a shchiv meira gives away all of his property, the assumption is that gift is dependent on his death, right? And should he recover, the gift is void. The death is void also, right? But the gift is void. On the other hand, if a shchiv meira only gives away partial property, right? A little bit to this, a little bit to this, a little bit to this, the assumption right now is that gift will be valid even if the shchiv meira does not die. Right, which makes sense because again, since he's only giving away partial things, it's normal for people to give away stuff even when they're totally healthy, Baruch Hashem, and therefore that gift stands even if he recovers. So we'll say, so what's interesting about this case is as follows. In this case over here, shchiv meira is giving Ruvain something, right, a parcel, not everything, and then he gives Shimon everything. Now we'll say, so therefore, what does the Gemara say? Now shchiv meira recovers. What's the halacha? So Rishon kana, Sheni lo kana. Rishon Ruvain, he keeps his gift. Why does he keep his gift? Because since it was only a partial conveyance of the shchiv meira, such a conveyance is effective even in the event of the shchiv meira's recovery. Shimon, however, got everything. So because Shimon got everything, therefore what? Therefore halacha l'maisa, that type of gift is really predicated on the shchiv meira's death, and therefore since the shchiv meira doesn't die, ultimately Shimon doesn't get to keep his property. Now, Rabbi will say, what's the tricky part? What does it mean that Shimon got everything? Right? Because how does the case read? Shchiv meira gives Reuven a gift, right? Something, and then he gives Shimon everything. Rabbi will say, there are 2 ways to understand everything. What are the 2 ways to understand everything? Everything could either mean, right, everything that's left over after the gift to Ruvain, or the second possibility is that shchiv meira actually changed his mind about Ruvain, right? Or I should say, included in Shimon's gift, ultimately again everything that he also had given to Ruvain. And I will say the distinction between those 2 cases, and this is where the rush comes in, Let's skip down in the rush. So we'll say if you go in the rush, white lines, second line in. See it? In the middle of the line. So the rush says, Umeikara kisha amar miktsasan l'rishon lo hayil b'daito litem l'sheni. The rush understands the cases like this. When Shchiv Meirah gave to Ruvain the gift, ultimately, again, he had no intention of giving Shimon anything. So he's giving Ruvain a partial gift and has no intentions about Shimon. B'shuv nimlach lachsar bal min harishon v'litein hakol l'sheni. Ultimately, again, then Shchiv Meirah has a change of heart. What's his change of heart? He decides not to give a gift to Ruvain and to give everything to Shimon. So we'll say, in the Rush's understanding of things, when Shchiv Meirah makes a gift of everything to Shimon, he's giving everything to Shimon, even that which was originally allocated for Ruvain. Therefore, again, the ikulon l'sheni dekamra hainu mashashir min nechasav shelo nitam l'rishon im kein rishon amai kana im amad harechilek kol nechasav v'havi matna shrimra v'kula. Now, I will say, here's what's interesting. Remember we said, there's a lot going on over here. Remember we said before that halacha l'maisa, if a Shchiv Meirah just gives a partial gift to individuals, that gift does not work. I'm sorry, let me say that again. If a Shchiv Meirah gives a partial gift to individuals, then we assume that gift, it works even if the Shchiv Meirah recovers. Right? The only time something is called a true deathbed conveyance is when the Shchiv Meirah gives away everything. There's one exception to that rule. If the Shchiv Meirah does give away his entire estate, but to multiple people. So if he were to go ahead and give some property to Ruvain, and then the rest of his property to Shimon, even though he's only giving a partial gift to Ruvain and a partial gift to Shimon, since it's the entirety of his estate, that is a matnas Shchiv Meirah, and therefore should he recover, ultimately again, the gift is void. Therefore the Rush says, it can't be that that's the case. Because if that's the case, that he's giving a gift to Ruvain, and then the rest that remains to Shimon, that means everyone's receiving a part of the estate. That's called the matna Shchiv Meirah. And therefore, should the Shchiv Meirah recover, no one gets anything. The fact that we say the first person is Kona, the second person is not, indicates to us that the case must be he's giving something to Ruvain, and then ultimately again changes his mind and gives everything to Shimon. Everything to Shimon. Then I will say, what's the halacha? If the Shchiv Meirah recovers, the gift to Shimon is void, but the gift to Ruvain still stands. Now we'll say, why is this here? What is this doing in our sugya? So we'll say here, look at the Rush, follow the Rush. The Rush says, so therefore says Rush, it must be that when he gives the gift to Shimon, the second guy, he's including everything, including that which he originally allocated to Shimon. Hachenami daito amashehifkir. Here it is, Rabbi Said. What's happening in this case? What do you see? That when Shchiv Meirah gives a gift to Shimon, Rabbi Said, what is he including in that gift? Everything he originally gave to Reuven as well. So too says the Rush. What do you see from here? That even when a person does something, they include stuff they gave away before. Why is this important? So I'll say, going back to Rabbi Yossi. What did we say about Rabbi Yossi? We said that according to Rabbi Yossi, if you make something hefker and then make a neder, right? Reuven makes property hefker, and then Reuven makes a neder, what? To not give Shimon any benefit. Rabbi Yossi wanted to suggest that neder does not include the stuff that Reuven had previously made hefker. Rabbi Yossi, you see from here that that's not the case. You see from here that even Allah Shalamis, when Reuven makes something hefker, then makes a neder, the neder should include even the stuff that he previously made hefker. Much in the same way that when the Shchiv Meirah goes ahead and gives a gift to Shimon, what does he include in that gift to Shimon? He says everything. What does he include? Even the stuff that he went ahead and gave to Reuven. So the point I will say that the Gemara is making is that when you do something now, it may very well potentially include the things that you had in mind for different ways beforehand. So therefore, again, in Rabbi Yossi's model, we said, if you make an item hefker, and then Reuven, you make a neder not to give Shimon any kind of benefit, halacha l'maisa, ultimately, again, that neder doesn't include that which was previously hefker. Kamash Mu'am, the Gemara says, yes, it does. Yes, it does. In which case, again, we have a problem once again with Rabbi Yossi. To which the Gemara says, Ela Amar Rava, Hainutam Rabbi Yossi. What's Rabbi Yossi's problem? Rabbi says it's so much simpler. Kazerashum Maknas Beis Charon. Beis Charon. Rabbi said the problem of Rabbi Yossi, ultimately, again, is a case of the gift of Beis Charon. So Rabbi say it's interesting how we took such a journey to finally get to this, but this is the Pasha Pshat. Rabbi say, what's Rabbi Yossi's problem with the whole Hefker thing in the Mishnah? What's his problem? It's very simple. His problem, Rabbi says, the case of Beis Charon is a case we're going to see later on. Rabbi say, Rashi actually quotes it. Rashi quotes it. So this was a case, following case. A guy makes a neder that his father can't get any benefits from his property. That's right. Son makes a neder, my father cannot benefit from me. Son is now making a chasana. Son wants his father to attend the chasana. So what does son do? Son goes ahead and gives all of his property to a third party. Right? All the wedding hall, the food, right? He gives everything to the third party and says, everything I have is a gift to you. Now, I will say, what was son's intention? Son's intention is that his father should be able to come to the chasana, right? And not eat the food, benefit, because again, nothing belongs to the son anymore. So I will say, so we'll call the guy Reuven. So what did Reuven do? So son said, here, everything belongs to you. What does Reuven do? Well, if everything belongs to me, I hereby make it hektish. Son's like, whoa, pump the brakes. That's not what I meant. I meant everything belongs to you just to create a little bit of a halachic fiction so that my father should come to the chasana. Right? So son is straightforward about his intention. So we'll say, the Gemara calls that this happened in a place called Beis Charon. The Gemara says, that's an example of a disingenuous gift. So we'll say, what is Rabbi Yossi concerned about in our Mishnah? Rabbi Yossi is concerned about in our Mishnah that in our case, where Reuven and Shimon are traveling together, Reuven made a neder that Shimon can't get any benefit from him. Now Shimon needs food. So suddenly again, what does Reuven do? He puts the food down on the ground and says, Hefker. Rabbi Yossi says, come on. It's not Hefker. What are you doing? Right, Reuven, what are you doing? You're trying to get the food from your possession to Shimon's possession without violating your neder. It's not real Hefker. Rabbi Yossi in general has a concern when people employ halachic mechanisms which are not genuine. So whether it's giving a gift that is not a genuine gift, or whether it's making something hefker and not genuinely hefker, Rabbi Yossi doesn't like it. That's what Rabbi say. So that's at the end of the day what we're concerned about. And Rabbi say, what's the raya for that? What's the raya? Reuven, they're traveling together. Reuven puts the food down on the ground, says it's hefker. So Rabbi say, Levi hears it, and when he comes running through and picks up the food, what's going to be Reuven's feeling? What's Reuven's feeling about that? Reuven's going to be very upset. That wasn't my intention. Well, again, so Rabbi Yossi will say, if you make something hefker and you're not happy with who took it, then what does that show? That you didn't really make it hefker. So we'll say that's the case of Manas Beis Choro. So Tanya, so let's analyze. Hamafkir es sadeu kol. So we'll say very interesting case. Person makes his field hefker. Kol shloshiyam lachzerbo. Should I will say also a lot of these Gemaras are subject to intense dispute in terms of their explanation, even right on the daf itself. So we're going to see just a moment. Person makes his field hefker. Kol shloshi yamim yachal lachzerbo. For the first 3 days after you made it hefker, you have the ability to go ahead and retract that declaration. Mikan ve'elech e yachal lachzerbo. After that, you can't retract the declaration. I will say, now what is going on over here? So I will say, if you take a look for just a moment in the Ran, now we're going to be in the middle of the Ran. We are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 lines up from the bottom of the Ran. You see it, the first word on the line is umefaresh taima. Umefaresh taima lekamon, demafkirin bahadrin bun. What does this mean? You make an item hefker. I'm going to see this in the Rambam as well. You make an item hefker, and then you go out and you retract the hefker designation. What does that mean? You could do that. Mishum de hefker patra mina meiser. Listen to this. When you make something hefker, essentially what it becomes is tax-free. Right? So I make my property hefker. What does that mean? Suddenly my property is not chayiv in shumas and meisus. I don't have to tithe it. So we'll say, what was the concern? People were utilizing this as a tax loophole. And what were they doing? They were going ahead and making their property hefker. Actually, it's a great kunz. It's excellent. They're making their property hefker. You make it hefker, and then what do you do in the next moment or in the next hour? You take it back. I will say the halacha is anything that you acquire from hefker is also exempt from meiser. So people would make their property hefker and go ahead and then reclaim ownership. But you're reclaiming. I know. I see a lot of heads shaking. Yeah, it's good. Head good gesagt, as they say. Right? So they were reclaiming their property, and now again, my property was exempt from Meiser. So the Ran says over here, Shahayu. So the Gemara says, Hayu Ramoin mafkirin sados saying li pater. So you had Ramai. What's a Ramai? Right? A Ramai is a deceitful person. So you had deceitful people that were exploiting this loophole, making their property hefker in order to go ahead and then reclaim it and say, I acquired this from hefker, and therefore again it's meiser free. And we'll say when they made it hefker, their entire intention was to reacquire it. Therefore, their entire process of making something hefker was a subterfuge. Listen to this. So therefore, Chazal said like this. Essentially, you have 3 days to go ahead and, so if you make something hefker, you have 3 days to retract your hefker designation, which Rabbi said by definition means as follows. If you make something hefker, and then what? Reacquire that item within 3 days. What have you effectively done? What have you done? You've canceled your hefker declaration. So Rabbi say, what does that do? The Ran goes in and he points out, he says, if somebody was utilizing this as a subterfuge, so Rabbi say, there's only so long you're going to allow your field to remain hefker. Why? Because someone else could come along and acquire it. So those who are looking to exploit this loophole, what they would do is they would leave it hefker for some amount of time, never longer than 3 days. So look at this chat that Chazal did. Chazal said, no problem. When you make something hefker, you have 3 days to retract the designation, which means if you reacquire that property within 3 days, it's as if you've canceled your hefker declaration, and now it's yours, like if it never happened. And I must say what that does is, that roots out anyone who's trying to exploit this as a tax shelter. Incredible. So what says, let's go back there. After 3 days, you can no longer go ahead and cancel out the hefker designation. Top of Mem Dalet. However, Amar Tehei Sadazumuv Keres Liyom Echad. What happens if a person says this field should be hefker for 1 day? Right, that's the designation of it. It should be hefker for 1 day. I want to point out, when you say that, that's not necessarily trying to do anything illicit. In other words, I might just be saying the field should be hefker for 1 day. Whoever comes and gets it in that 1 day, it's a time designation. Or the Shabbos Echad for 1 week, the Chodesh Echad for 1 month, the Shana Achas for 1 year, the Shavua Achas for 1 Shemitah for 1 7-year period. So we'll say, what's the halacha in these cases? Here we go. Ad shelo zacha ba bein hu bein acher. So we'll say, so as long as no one else has acquired it, yochol lachzer bo. So we'll say, when I make that designation, right? So I make that stipulation. My field, let's just keep a simple case. My field should be hefker for 1 week. Okay, so we'll say, so as long as no one else has acquired that field, I haven't reacquired it, because also remember again, when you make something hefker, you also have the ability to what? If I make my gemara, I make my shtender hefker, right? So we'll say, so what's the halacha? Who has the right to acquire it? Anyone, including who? Me. In other words, I'm no different than anyone else when it comes to hefker, even though I'm going to make it hefker. So the gemara says like this: I say my field will be hefker for a week. Jabal say, so if neither I nor anyone else acquired it during that time, I have the ability to cancel that hefker designation. In other words, up until the point that someone has gone ahead and taken possession of that field, I have the ability to cancel my hefker designation. Okay? Obviously, I will say, when the point comes that either I or someone else has acquired it, at that point again, then halacha l'maisa, I no longer have the right to go ahead and cancel that designation. Fine. Shabbos says, so now I have 2 cases. Case number 1 is it was all the same brisa. Case number 1, I made something hefker. There are 3 days, right? Within the first 3 days after the designation, I have the ability to go ahead and cancel that hefker designation. So if I were to reacquire it within those 3 days, by definition, it's canceled. By the way, I just want to point out, we're not delving into it, but one of the interesting major flashpoints over here of this sugya is, if someone else acquired that property in the first 3 days, what happens? Could I still cancel the hefker designation or not? The Ran says yes. The Rosh says no. But again, we're not wading into that machlokes. So case number one is you make something hefker. For the first 3 days after your designation of hefker, you have the ability to walk that back. You have the ability to cancel that designation. Case two, you make a timed hefker declaration. My field is hefker for a week, for a month, for a year, for 7 years, whatever it is. Shalach alamaisa. As long as no one else has acquired that item, you have the ability to walk back that hefker. So again, I just want to be clear. What does it mean to walk back the hefker? What does it mean to walk it back? You could cancel it. It's as if I never made a hefker declaration. So the property was never hefker. You can walk that back. Once someone has acquired it, either myself or someone else, you cannot walk back the hefker designation. Good. Says the Gemara, Amar Ula, Sefer, so the Gemara says, fine. Reisha Rabbanan Sefer Rabbi Yossi. Shabbos says, so Bepashtos, the first case reflects the view of the Rabbanan. The second case reflects the view of Rabbi Yossi. Now, let's go back for just a moment. Remember again, we have a raging machlokes in the world of hefker between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi. What's the raging machlokes? The Rabbanan hold the say, when does something become hefker? The moment you make it hefker. I say this shtender is hefker. I no longer own it. According to Rabbi Yossi, I was saying, if I say this shtender is hefker, when do I truly relinquish my ownership? When someone else takes possession of it. But up until the point that someone takes possession of it, it's still mine, even though I have said it's hefker. So the Gemara wants to suggest that halacha l'maisa, the first case is the Rabbanan, second case is Rabbi Yossi. How so? I say, take a look at Rashi. Rashi's right across. On the right hand side. Reish Rabbanan Sefer Rabbi Yossi. Reish da'amar mishloshi yamim ve'elach afilu lo asal rishazocha ein yochal lachzerbo. Have a careful. So listen to this, because in the first case, Rabbi Yossi, what does happen after the first 3 days? Right? I make the shtender hefker. 3 days go by. What happens? It's hefker. Even though what? It has not come into someone else's possession. So that's the Rabbanon. That once you make something hefker, even if it doesn't come into someone else's possession, halacha l'maisa, it's hefker. So the ratio of the first case, again, Rabbi say, the 3 day, I just want to point out, the 3 day window is there to prevent unscrupulous individuals, right? To prevent ramos, to prevent subterfuge, to prevent someone from exploiting the hefker system to create a tax shelter for their property. That's what's happening. But after the 3 days, the property automatically becomes ownerless, even though no one else is taking possession of it. That's the Rabbanan. Versus the Seifa, the second case, which is the case of timed hefker, which tells me that as long as someone else has not taken possession of it, it's not yet truly hefker. To which the Gemara says, Amr Ula, not necessarily, Seifa nami Rabbanani. The truth is, even the Seifa, Ula says the Seifa could also go ahead and reflect the view of the Rabban. I will say, now how so? Take a look at Rashi again. First white line in Rashi. Amr Ula, Seifa nami Rabbanani. Tevadim midoraisa afagav lo asir shazocha havi hefker la'alter vafilu miyom rishon. So I'll say, in reality, midda oraisa. The moment you make something hefker, it's hefker, even if it has not yet come into the possession of someone else. V'hai da'amar kol shlosh yamim yachal lachzar dilagabe lo chashiva hefker mipnei d'raman. So we're going to see this in a little bit. Ula, right? Even, right? I'm sorry. Right? This is the ratio. Excuse me. But the Seifa, skip down a little bit. Skip it in Rashi. The Seifa damar ad shelo zachaba lo havi hefker demashma ad da'asil rishos zocha haynu taimid d'shayni chodesh v'shana v'shavua d'lo shlichan. We're going to see that Ula is going to say this case of timed hefker is an unusual case. And in an unusual case, maybe even the Rabbanon ultimately would agree. So the Rabbanon normally say that something becomes just hefker. As soon as you make it hefker, it leaves your domain, even if someone doesn't take possession of it. That's in a typical case of hefker. It could very well be that this case of timed hefker is an unusual case, and therefore it doesn't fully leave my domain until the time expires. Ihachi, amai ad shelo zachaba, bein hu bein achar yachal lachzebo. So we'll say that's the case Halacha l'maisa, if it's according to the Rabbanon, right? So we'll say, then why does the Brisa say, if ultimately again, achelo zachaba, right? The Brisa said, up until if he doesn't reacquire it, or someone else acquires it, he's able to go ahead and renege. So we'll say, according to the Rabbanon, you can never renege. Right? We'll say, according to the Rabbanon, once you make something hefker, then what Rabbi say? It remains forever hefker. In other words, until someone requires it, even before someone else acquires it. I will say, remember, the fundamental point of contention between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi is when you make an item hefker, does that hefker status set in immediately, and therefore again the owner has relinquished his ownership, or maybe the owner only truly relinquishes his ownership once the property comes into the hands of the second party. If you want to say that the seifa is even the Rabbanon, then in the case of timed hefker, why do we say that the owner has the ability to recant or retract the hefker designation? According to the Rabbanon, once you make something hefker, by definition, it's hefker. That's it. There's nothing more to talk about. To which the Gemara says, "Shiny shana v'shavua to lo shlichi." Shavuot said, "This is the answer." It could very well say, it's actually very interesting. So it could be what the Gemara is saying is like this. The Rabbanon normally say, if you make something hefker, what happens? What happens, right? I say this shtender is hefker. Rabbanon say, halachically, what has happened in that moment? What has happened? I don't own it. I don't own it. Even before someone else even hears about the hefker, even before someone else, I don't own it. But one second. What about the following case? We said before, I make my field hefker for a week. Hefker for a week. What did the Brisa say? As long as no one, during that week, as long as no one else has taken possession of it, I have the ability to do what? To recant and to retract. But now Ula wants to suggest that even goes according to the Rabbanon. But the Rabbanon say, once you make something hefker, it's hefker and you can't retract it. So how does that shtim? To which the Gemara says something very interesting. This is, we'll say, the case of timed hefker is an unusual case. It could very well be that, according to the Rabbanon, in this unusual case, they will agree that you could walk back the hefker as long as no one else has taken possession of the object, which makes sense, Rabbi say, because this whole thing is a timed hefkerus. It makes sense to say that you could potentially walk it back. Okay. Reish Lakish says, "May the Sefer Rabbi Yossi Beishinam Rabbi Yossi." Reish Lakish says, no. Since the Sefer, again, I will say in general, when it comes to a brisa, we like to have kind of coherent authorship throughout the entire thing. So therefore, if the Sefer is going to be Rabbi Yossi, the Reisha is also going to be Rabbi Yossi. But according to Rabbi Yossi, again, halacha l'maisa, after 3 days, it sounds like the item automatically becomes hefker. But according to Rabbi Yossi, an item only becomes hefker when it comes into the possession of someone else. So what's going on over here? The Gemara says, Reisha hainu taima delo lishkach toras hefker. So this is very interesting. So the Reisha, what's the whole chap? The whole chap ultimately, again, is we don't want the concept of hefker to be forgotten. I will say, what does that mean? What does that mean? So if you look, I will say, at the Rush for just a moment, the Rush on the right-hand column, right in the middle, says, Reisha nami Rabbi Yossi, to l'shtachach toras hefker, the min hadin li olav hayel yachal lachzer bo, v'chayeves b'meiser, de lo habi hefker ad asi l'rishus hazocha, ela shetiknu chachamim de la'achar shloshi yamim lo yuchal lachzer. Shabbos say, this is very interesting. According to Rabbi Yossi, he holds like this. Shabbos say, it's actually fascinating. I make an item hefker. Okay, so let's play this out. So what's the halacha? For the first 3 days, what's the halacha? If I go, I can walk it back. Now, both say, according to Rabbi Yossi, that's not a chiddush. Because according to Rabbi Yossi, again, you can walk it back as long as what? Someone else has not taken possession of it. The chiddush according to Rabbi Yossi is after 3 days, you can't walk it back. Now, again, after 3 days, if someone else has not taken possession of it, you could take possession of it, but you can't walk back the hefker declaration. But Rabbi Yossi, according to you, that should be mutter, since according to you, again, the item remains ownerless, or the item kind of remains yours, I should say, until someone else takes possession. Rabbi Yossi says the problem with that is, if you could do it infinitum, right? If you could just do it forever, the concept of hefker will be forgotten. So in order that the concept of hefker should not be forgotten, Chazal instituted that after 3 days, you can't walk back your hefker designation. You can go ahead and reacquire it if you want, but you can't walk it back in order to maintain the concept of hefker. Says the Gemara, Ihachi, afilu miyom rishonami, lehavi hefker. If that's the case, Rabbi Yossi, then why not even say from the first day, let it be hefker? Okay, so that's what we said before. Amarabba mipnei haramoin demafkirin uvahadrinon bahon. Because Rabbi says, because once again, so we have Rabbi say this very interesting, delicate balance. According to Rabbi Yossi, when you make an item hefker, for the first 3 days you can walk it back. You can walk it back. Afterwards, you can't walk back your hefker declaration. Why, Rabbi say? So again, for the first 3 days, because we're concerned that people are going to exploit this mechanism, right? They're going to make something hefker in order to free their produce from any type of meiser obligation, and therefore, in order to avoid that, what we say is, if you go ahead and make something hefker, then within 3 days take it back. Ultimately, it's like you never made it hefker. After 3 days, it is hefker. Even according to Rabbi Yossi, who says that something doesn't only become hefker until it really reaches the possession of a second party. But after 3 days, Chazal needed to safeguard the concept of hefker, and therefore halacha l'maisa, after 3 days, even according to Rabbi Yossi, it becomes hefker, even if it has not come into the possession of someone else. To which the Gemara says, Aval daraisa lahavi hefker. But here's what's interesting about say. But according at least to Rabbi Yossi, midaraisa, it's not hefker. Because according to Rabbi Yossi, ultimately, again, it still kind of remains in your possession up until the point that what? Someone else takes possession of it. Well, if that's the case, so I'll say Amen Beis, the Dilma, Asi li isuri min achiyav ala patra min apatra ala chiyuv. So Rabbi say, now we have a problem. What's our problem? So Rabbi say, you pretty much have a situation of property that's hefker, that's not really hefker midaraisa. Rabbi will say, if property is not really hefker midaraisa, then what? Then it's chayiv in meiser. If it's chayiv in meiser, Rabbi will say, you may get into a very, very confusing situation of tithing from things that are chayiv on meiser, from things that are not chayiv on meiser, chayiv in meiser. And Rabbi will say, that's always incredibly complicated. So in other words, what you have essentially is a piece of property that really midoraisa is not hefker. If it's not hefker, then it's chayiv in meiser. And if it's chayiv in meiser, you may come to go ahead and use it, or you may tithe that which is obligated in meiser on that which is not obligated in meiser. To which the Gemara says, no. Darminon le ki ma'asart asar minei ubei. The Gemara says, no. What we tell a person with this kind of property is, when you tithe this kind of property, tithe it on itself from itself. In other words, Rabbi say, so certain properties which are kind of caught up in a little bit of a legal tug of war in terms of what their status is, we say to the owner of that property, tithe it from it in it. In other words, only tithe the produce of this field from that very same field. Don't go ahead and tithe other fields from it, or tithe it from other fields, because in fact the halachic designation may be fundamentally different. Good. So basically, Gemara is the kasha. Hamafkir is karmo. We'll say a very interesting case. Hamafkir is karmo ulam ulashachar amaru basro. But so listen to this case. Person makes his field hefker, and then the next morning he gets up and he harvests the field. Now, we'll say. So let's be clear. When you go and you make your field hefker, there's something called peret and olalos. Peret and olalos means kind of like leket and shichacha. Just like a shicha, you drop stalks, you leave them on the ground. You leave behind the bushel, you leave it for the poor. So too by vines, you leave behind a couple of straggling grapes, you leave it on the vine. You leave a cluster, you leave it on the vine. In other words, that's halacha. So we'll say, listen to this case. So same idea. If you go ahead and you have a vineyard, and you make that vineyard hefker, and I will say, see now, once you make it hefker, it's putter from what we call peret and olalos, which is like the grapes or the clusters that are left behind, which makes sense. In other words, you make something hefker, it's exempt from tithes. Now what happens? The next morning you got up and you harvested that vineyard. Amar Patzro, chayiv beperet olalos b'shichacha upeya upatra bin amaiser. So I'll say, interestingly enough, if you get up the next morning and you go ahead and you harvest that vineyard, so what's the halacha? You're going to be chayiv in peret and olalos, shichacha and peya, but you're pater from meiser. So I will say, now here's what's interesting. So if you look at the Ran for just a moment, I will say, so it's the last 3 lines in the Ran. Meisvei, hamaf, I have no idea how I'm running up against the clock on a daf like this, but okay, fine. So Meisvei, hamaf, kiras karmol l'shachar amar batzor, the Ran says, mishum, daf agav de hefker pater mikulu kidarmina ba'alma, nishmar l'mi'ute hefker, afilu hachim mishum de bekulu hanik siv tazov yisera, mechayiv kolecha shehichsik bohu asmo v'hachis. So we'll say, we're going to see, interestingly enough, that the halacha is that by these unique tithes that are related to the vineyard, if you go ahead and you make it hefker, and then you take possession of it again, right, or you do something that looks like you're taking possession of it again, you're going to be chayiv in those unique tithes associated with the vineyard. Conversely, the Ran says, you're part of from Meiser. Why? The Chaven the lo ksib b'Meiser tazov yisira lo shnahu lo shna acher pater. So I will say, what we're going to see is as follows: that halacha l'maisa. We're actually going to stop with this case for today. We'll pick up. We have time for tomorrow also. We'll pick up with this case tomorrow. We'll say what we're going to see is that halacha l'maisa vineyard is something very interesting. That if you make a vineyard hefker and then you do something which demonstrates ownership, you're going to be chayiv in certain tithes and ultimately again pater from other tithes. So I will say why that distinction is in Meretz Hashem we'll see tomorrow. What I just do want to end off with, Rabbi say, is one piece of interesting halacha l'maisa, which is what do we do with this 3-day hefker? Rabbi say, so the Rambam paskins in Hilchos Nedarim Perek Beis Halacha Yud Zayin hamafkir esadeh v'lo zacha ba'adam kol shloshi yamim yachal lachzer bo. Rabbi say we accept this premise that if you go ahead and you make something hefker, right? And no one else acquired it for the first 3 days, you are permitted to walk back that hefker designation. After 3 days, ultimately again, so halacha l'maisi, you cannot renege on the hefker. So Rabbi say, I just want to show you something amazing. Again, we'll see this more tomorrow, because look what we have outstanding. Number one, we have a couple of things outstanding. Number one, the Mishnah. Right, the Mishnah. What do Reuven and Shimon do? Shimon needs food. Reuven ultimately has food. Does making the food hefker work or not? That's outstanding issue number one. Outstanding issue number two. Is there such a thing as a 3-day window after hefker? Outstanding issue number three, Rabbi Osai, is what happens after 3 days? Right? Does actual hefker begin or not? And outstanding issue number four, which is really the overarching global issue, is the machlokes Rabbana and Rabbi Yossi about the mechanics of hefker. When you make something hefker, does that item automatically leave your domain, literally upon making it hefker, or halacha l'maisa, does it remain partially tethered to you until someone else takes possession? Rabbi Osai, the answer to all of those questions and tomorrow's daf, Emirat Hashem, tomorrow. Shigayach.
Use the art stall, bring Nedarim 2 tomorrow.
All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone.
Much more disingenuous than selling your phone. Knowing you're going to buy it back. It's not a disingenuous case.
It was
It's going to be the most